Why do women have this vast number of body counts and sexual history? Sometimes it has to do with who they are, or they're driven by financial needs or motives. And sometimes it may be at a traumatic level, a trauma level that they're operating in this way. Let's take a listen to what this psychologist had to say about women who had a vast amount of sexual experience.
Fortunately.
Have you reflected on the rise of escorts and sex work? I think it's pretty fascinating to look at the psychology of the women who do it and the men who pay for it.
Yeah. Well, the women who do it usually, and I think it's probably less now, but there's a big history of childhood sexual abuse. And the reason why child abuse often then becomes monetized sex work is because when we are violated as a child, men or women, when something is violated from us, the only way your ego kind of makes sense of what happens to you is to minimize the importance and significance of what was stolen from you. So if I was abused sexually, if I then minimize the importance of sex and then take some control by monetizing it and saying, I'm now in control of my body, I'm either going to be hyper promiscuous or I'm going to monetize it, what it does is minimizes the significance of sex, and therefore I don't have to deal with the trauma I experienced. I now see sex as just an activity, and therefore if I was abused, it's not that serious. And so the psychology of them is usually coming from a broken place. And also the other thing that they struggle with is knowing what loyalty looks like in a relationship. They don't see it as an essential component because they've monetized sex and taken away the emotion element to it. So it becomes very difficult for them to be sexually loyal to their partner. It's almost like they see sex as a bit as an activity, and if they do it with somebody else, why would that bother you? They don't understand the process. So they end up being quite emotionally disconnected, very transactional with their partners, and the relationships become the relationships don't really last very long, unfortunately. They're void of emotions, and then it translates into their parenting as well.
What about the psychology of the men who pay for it?
The psychology of the man that actually goes towards it is usually he is somebody who's highly avoidant to begin with. There was some emotional disconnect in their parents, in their household. So when you want to court a beautiful woman in the real world, she requires some emotional connection first and foremost, or at least at some point. Now, if you find it hard to experience emotional connection and you have the money to go from pornography to escorts, you skip the emotion component and go straight to escorts. Basically, escorts are porn addicts with money. Yeah, essentially that is for them. And that low self-esteem, that's intense low self-esteem with the men that pay for escorts means that they don't believe they can access a woman of that caliber in real life. So let me at least pay in for it, and therefore I don't have to experience rejection. The reason why emotional kind of disconnect is so important for the customer is a man that understands emotional intelligence and understands a woman's emotions wouldn't feel comfortable having sex with a woman he knows doesn't want to be there. A guy that normally has emotional intelligence will think, oh God, she's probably not enjoying this. And oh God, what trauma led her to get here? I don't want to have sex with somebody who doesn't want to have sex with me. But the man who skipped that emotional intelligence and just wants pleasure will not even think about the emotional trauma that got her to this position and just think, as long as she pleases me, I don't really care what it took to get her here. So that emotional disconnect in both of them, which is why they often fall in love with each other. Fall in love is to minimize the importance and significance of what was stolen.
Skipped ahead there. So, in other words, they have they're both damaged. So, for lack of a better word, the man is avoiding an emotional connection. He may have been raised that way, and then the woman also, who may have gone through some kind of sexual abuse, physical abuse, she's also removed the emotional part from the activity, and then they come together, and this is how it works. Because we can talk all day about the women who do this kind of work, who are the OnlyFans model, but men, on the other hand, damaged men who have trauma as well, they're also stimulating the marketplace for it. So if there weren't the men, then the women would have anyone to sleep with, unless to sleep with other women. I mean, that's possible too, but for the most part, it's usually male and female. And If it wasn't for the men, if they weren't the females, then they wouldn't, unless they are into same sex kind of thing. But in the heterosexual dynamics, male and female, it takes the two to tango. Now, when these women who have the trauma, they're making all of this money, why aren't they seeking help? Or maybe that they don't know that there's something deep emotionally and psychologically and spiritually not 100%. They're making all of this money. What are they doing with all this money? There is a teacher who an ex-teacher who, I was going to talk about that today, but I decided not to. Earlier this year, she quit her job as a teacher, and she made over $1 million as an OnlyFans model. She said that her family was struggling, and she's married with 4 children. Now, that's another story for a different day. But she's putting her goodies out there. She's a mother, and she's not thinking about the harm that it's gonna do to her kids, or that's doing to her kids, or even her husband. He may be okay with it because, well, money is coming in. I'm able to put food on the table, So I'm trying to, when they're making all of this money, what are they doing with all of this money to really have a positive effect on their own lives, like getting help, getting healing from whatever trauma that they may have? It's a real sticky and dicey situation. And that's all I'm going to say about that.